welcome to my channel. This is Jay from Coding with Jaybird, where I upload weekly tutorials to help build your confidence in coding. Today we're going to look at JavaScript number methods. Let's start coding, shall we? Here's my number methods.html file, which is linking to a main.js in the JS folder. So let's go ahead and start writing some code logic in our main.js. So let's talk a little bit about number methods. Number methods are great because they'll help us work with numbers. Now, because JavaScript treats primitive values as objects when executing methods and properties, we're able to use number methods in our code logic. So the first method I'd like to talk about is the toFixed method. Now, this toFixed method returns a string with the number written with a specified number of decimals. So if I were to have some variable, let's say a, which equals 5.8272, and then I console.log a, we're going to see that it shows up here as a number in our console. So it's like a dark navy blue text here. Now, if I were to do a console.log and apply the toFixed method onto this a variable, and let's say I passed in the value 1, let's see what we get. Now we get a string, and you can see the text here is changed to like a dark black color, and that represents a string in the console. So we're getting a value of 5.8. So it's actually reduced this 5.8272 and only reducing it down to 1 decimal place. Now, if I were to do a console.log a toFixed, and now I pass in 0, we're going to see that it rounds to the nearest whole number and we get 0 decimal places. So it took that 5.8272 and it rounded it up to 6. We can also round it up higher than the value itself. So let's say I did toFixed 5. Now you can see we have 5.8272 and it added this extra 0 because we're looking for 5 decimal places. The second method I'd like to talk about is the toExponential method. And the toExponential method converts a number into an exponential notation. So if I have some variable, let's say b, which is equal to 2.2, let's say 35, and I were to console.log b with the toExponential method applied to it and pass in, let's say 0, what it's going to do is it's going to reduce this 2.235 down to 2 times 10 to the power of 0. So you're getting this 2e plus 0. Now let's do another console.log and we'll apply the toExponential method to this variable b once again. And this time we'll pass in the value 1. We're going to see that we round up to 1 decimal place and we get 2.2 e to the power of 0. And again, if I did a console.log b toExponential, and let's say I pass in a higher number, like perhaps 6, what we're going to see is it's just going to add extra zeros to show us 6 decimal places when they're not actually there. So since we have 2.235, it fills in 3 extra decimal places for us with the 3 zeros. Now the next method I want to talk about is the toString method, which is quite useful. Now the toString method returns a number as a string. So if I had some variable, let's say c equal to 345, and then let's say I had another variable d equal to 123. Now let's create another variable called answer1, which will be equal to c with the toString method applied to it. And now when I console.log answer1, we see 345, but it's in black text. So we can see that it took that number 345 and converted it to a string. Now let's create an answer2 variable. And this time we'll do the same thing, but we'll apply it to the variable d. And let's again output this to the console to see what we get. And again, we see the number has been converted to a string, 123. So now let's see what happens if I were to add these two. So if I take c plus d and I add them, I get this blue number and it says 468. So it actually added them mathematically and we got the value 468. But if we were to console.log answer 1 plus answer 2, we're going to get something a little different. We actually see something almost like concatenation. It took 3, 4, 5 and joined 1, 2, 3 onto it. And that's because we're adding 2 string values. Something else you can do is you can also pass in some addition right into the function itself. So you can say 20, let's say plus 30 dot to string. And then when you save this, you're going to see it did the math for you first, and then it converted it to a string. Our next function that we're going to talk about, or rather next method, will be the toPrecision method. Now the toPrecision method returns a string with a number written with a specified length. So once again, let's create a variable. We'll call it E, and we'll store another number in it, 12.468, let's say. And if I were to output to the console E with the toPrecision method applied to it, precision, and I save it, well, we just get that exact same value, 12.468. So we're just getting the default. Now, if I did a console.log, the same thing, E toPrecision, and this time I pass in, let's say, 3. So what do we get? We're getting a value of 12.5, which has the length of 3 in the string. Okay, so let's do a console.log e.toPrecision, and this time let's pass in a higher number such as 6. And what do we get here? We get a string with a length of 6 this time, and it's actually added an extra 0 at the end to ensure that we get that length of 6. All right, the next method I want to talk about is the value of method. Now the value of method returns a number as a number. So let's say we have some variable f, which equals, let's say, 897. And now what we want to do is do a console.log where we take f and apply the value of method to it without passing anything into it. And we just get that same number back, and you can see it's like this navy blue color, meaning it's still a number. Now we can also do a console.log to see what happens if we pass into numbers and we try to do the math prior to doing the value of. So let's say I said 28 plus 12, and I applied the value of method to it. What it does is it adds the 28 plus 12, gives us a value of 40, and it still keeps it as a number. Now we can also convert variables to numbers. So that's a little different now. There are 3 JavaScript methods that can be used to convert variables to numbers: the number method, the parse int method, and the parse float method. So let's start with our first one, which is the number method. So this number method returns a number converted from its argument. So what does that mean? Well, let's see. If I were to do a console.log, and here I say number method, and in here I pass a string value, let's say of 5, and I save it, what do we get? We get a value of 5, and you can see that 5 is a number data type because it's that navy blue color. And again, let's try it out with number, and this time let's pass some spaces in. So I'll put some spaces and write number 7. Now this might confuse it, but as you can see, it doesn't. It outputted 7. Okay, so let's try another one. What if we had the number method and we passed in 1.34? We get 1.34. So it works with decimal places as well. I wonder if it'll work with Boolean values. So let's say I take a number and pass in true in the number method. We get 1, which is the Boolean equivalent of true. So if I had a console.log of number and I pass in false, we would expect 0. And we get 0. Perfect. All right, now what if I tried to put in some text in here? So not a number representation, but some word. So let's say I said web design. Oh, what's this? I'm getting nan. So that means if a number cannot be converted, we get a return value of nan, which stands for not a number. Now, what if I were to pass in two numbers? So if I had number, and then in here I said maybe 3,68. So I have like a comma separated list almost. Once again, I get nan because it doesn't recognize that as a number. Okay, and the next type that I want to talk about is the Parse Int Method. Now this Parse Int Method parses a string and returns a whole number. Once again, spaces are allowed and only the first number is returned. So let's try this. We'll do console.log, and in here I'll say Parse Int Method, and in here I'm going to pass in a value of 5.2. And I get 5, and that's because it's returning a whole number. Now I wonder if I can do that with a negative value. So let's try it again. Parse int, and now I'll pass in negative 12. Hey, it works. I still get my whole number, but this time it shows a negative in front of it. That's neat. Okay, now what if I had two values in here? So parse int, and in here I pass in 6 space 8. Well, I mentioned that we would get the value of the first number returned to us in the console. And when I save it, you can see we get back 6. Not 68, not 8, but just 6. All right, perfect. Now our last method that I want to talk about is the parse float method. Now the parse float method parses a string and returns a floating point number. So a bit different than the last one, which gives us a whole number. This time we get a floating point number. Once again, spaces are allowed and only the first number is returned. So let's test this out. If I were to do a console.log, and in here I pass in the parse float method, and in the parse float method I pass in a string value of 2.34, this returns the exact same value to me, 2.34. Now, if I did a console.log, and I did a parse float, and in here I passed in multiple numbers, let's say 1 space 3 space 5, I get back 1, which is just the first number. And we talked about this earlier, only the first number will be returned. Okay, perfect. Okay, so now let's try passing in something different. Let's say I had a console.log with parse float, and this time, let's say I passed in, 10.2 space students, let's say. What do I get back? I get back 10.2 because that's the first number, and I get it back with its decimal floating point number. Perfect. Now lastly, let's test this out with a console.log of just parse float, and this time we'll just pass in students. And when I save it, we get back nan, which tells us it's not a number. That concludes my lesson on number methods. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button so that I can keep making more videos for you in the weeks to come. Until next week, keep on coding.